Is there a hidden, more esoteric, deeper meaning to the Hollywood films that we all love to watch? I'm Jay Dyer.
And I'm Jay Widener, and this is Hollywood Decoded.
Today we're going to look at artificial intelligence. This is the retelling of the Pinocchio story by Spielberg, adapted from the Stanley Kubrick script. And then we're going to look at Minority Report. This is another Spielberg film, this time adapted from dystopian Gnostic writer Philip K. Dick, that pictures a future when everything is tracked and traced.
Well, we know that this was originally going to be a one-two punch ending of Stanley Kubrick's career. He was going to put out Eyes Wide Shut in 1999 and then finish up on the year of his most famous film, 2001, and he was going to release AI. And he'd been working on it for years with Ian Watson and various other science fiction writers. And the story is that Spielberg, who was friends with Stanley, was given the script by Stanley to do, because Kubrick was very private about everything that he did. And I do believe he did give the script to Spielberg, but just to get an opinion. And so I actually have an insider who has told me what Kubrick's script was going to be about on AI, and we got the results of Spielberg's AI, which we're going to discuss. And they're completely different films, and I find it curious because as my insider told me when I was talking to him in 2001, right after this film came out, he told me, you know, what kind of person would really want to own a perpetual 12-year-old boy or girl? And would a mother really want to have a boy that never grows older, never matures, never goes to college and gets married? And I thought, no. And I thought, well, that kind of fits in a bookend way what Eyes Wide Shut is implying. Right? So I thought, wow, we really missed a big one here when Kubrick, died in 1999 and did not get to make AI. Spielberg's AI is a very different film, and I'm glad that he made it because it gives me insights into him more than anything else.
So artificial intelligence is operating just like Blade Runner on many levels. We have this fairy tale, and fairy tales come up many times in the film, but it's not your typical fairy tale. It's not just Pinocchio. It's a specific reorganization and retelling of the Gnostic mythology. And we know from Spielberg's penchant with using Philip K. Dick, as we're going to see in Minority Report, that he has no problem with a Gnostic retelling of stories. So what I see this as is basically a combination, a coalescence of a whole bunch of fairy tales that tell the story of transhumanism, repackaged, as we said, from Pinocchio, and then in a weird way kind of dehumanizing humans and humanizing the bots. And that's what we're going to see, especially when David is shown in his Edenic state with his mom. He has this very perfect, as we said, golden era, golden age fairy tale primeval state, and then he falls into understanding that the world is a mess. The world is the flesh fair. This is a very Dante-esque inferno scene where everybody's, torturing the bots, and Spielberg tries to evoke that Holocaust imagery with references to the Holocaust by some of the bots in that scene. And so then it takes us on this long journey to Rouge City, and then we experience the baser desires of humanity with these entire cities and buildings that are giant whores and strumpets bent over. I mean, we're going to see all kinds of really bizarre, crazy things in this movie. And then it goes into aliens. So what do you think?
Well, I think it's a number of things. And one of the things, and I'm going to keep coming back to this theme throughout the show that we do continuously, and that is the process of individuation.
Yeah.
And David, again, the robot, he is asleep in a lot of ways. And it isn't until his mom leaves him, or she leaves him out in the woods, and then he begins that Holocaust and that journey, that he begins to realize that he's an individual. And then when he finally meets the Blue Fairy, because he has a mission which none of the other robots ever have. He has a mission to see the Blue Fairy, which used to be, a statue in Coney Island, and but now it's underwater. And on the way, he meets Dr. Hobby, who is, of course, the alchemist who made him. and we find out that David is made in the image of his lost son, which again is a very kind of alchemist thing. And David reacts in a way like, no, I'm not just that, I'm more than that.
Right.
And then he takes his plunge into the water. So I think this really is about the process of individuation, which is why that we like these kinds of movies, because we ourselves, when in our lives, went through this same process. When we were young, we were kind of caught in the amorphous thinking of teachers and family and everything. But as you mature, especially when you hit your 20s, you begin individuating. You begin, I'm the best sax player in the neighborhood. I'm the, I can do math better than anybody.
Saxadelic.
Saxadelic. And so I think that's another thing that's going on here, and another reason why we like the film. But in the end, it is a nightmare.
So what we're going to see in this scene is this imprinting protocol, and I was able to mine a lot of data out of this, a lot of really esoteric topics. So if we look to the imprinting protocol, we'll see that. So I read this scene Kabbalistically, and I know that because Spielberg often uses the Kabbalistic mystical tradition, right, out of medieval Judaism. And what you have here is a retelling, in a way, of the Genesis narrative. So God creates man in his image, right, and breathes life into him. And we're told in Genesis that creation is done through some form of verbal sound vibration. If you're familiar with cymatics, you get the idea of sound imprinting these forms on nature.
Is it a game?
Now, I'm going to read some words, and they won't make any sense, but I want you to listen to them anyway, and look at me all the time. Can you do that?
Yes, Monica.
So in the same way, these vowels, these sounds that Monica makes as his mother, as his mother archetype, is what actually awakens him. And she actually, you'll notice on that diagram there were chakra points. There was here and then the back of his neck, right? So you have these regions or these zones that are specific to, their Hermetic tradition and so forth. And so I read that as, like you said, it is an awakening, but it requires almost a ritual process. And so it's very strange that we're seeing Mecca, as they're called in the film, set against the Orga, the humanity. And so it's science, it's scientism, it's technology, but it still contains that ritual magic aspect.
Hurricane, dolphin, tulip, Monica, David, Monica. All right. I wonder if I did that right.
What were those words for, Mommy?
What did you call me?
Mommy.
Who am I, David?
You are my mommy.
I think that's what David goes through as he's searching for his soul throughout the film, and you're right, she did ignite him in a way with words, and we don't really even understand the words that Spielberg is even choosing here.
Now, another level that's a little bit darker and more nefarious, something similar to what we saw in Blade Runner, is this idea of there being layers to consciousness, and that you could actually tap into or control how a person thinks or their thought process, and maybe even implant new memories or erase memories, right? And this is done through, for example, hypnosis. So the CIA did a lot of studies into hypnosis, and Dr. George Estabrooks wrote a famous essay in Science Digest back in 1971. It's called Hypnosis Comes of Age, and he talks about how he could create a military courier who could have alternate personalities, and then they could send him on a mission, and the only person who could access those memories suppressed in an alternate personality would be the person who had the key codes or the trigger codes. And so I read this as that, in a way, relating to this, because we're gonna see Jude Law's character is a sex bot. He's a sex operative. So yes, these are bots, but you have to understand that it operates on multiple levels, right? So these people are being used, right, in an allegorical way for how the elite, how the establishment uses people in Hollywood and so forth as sex operatives.
a lot of this AI actually began with those experiments in the 50s,
right.
and Jose Delgado stopping the bull with an
Electrodes, right.
Yep, and so these things have been going on a long time. I know Spielberg has to be really into
right.
these things, because we all are. And you're right, the trigger words can do anything. And I mean, the robots can be controlled from without.
Exactly.
They can be hacked. You know, who's ever in control is in control of them.
And from that technocratic worldview or that technocratic perspective, they view everything in a naturalistic reductionist perspective. So everything is material, everything is essentially a giant program that's running. And so really programming a bot or programming a human is no different, because they view us as bots.
They do.
Biological bots.
They do, and they very much view us that way. And it goes back to The Republic by Plato,
Yes.
where he's designing,
Cybernetics.
yeah, he's
Right.
designing this perfect society, and one of the things that can't be allowed in his perfect society is any kind of individualism.
Right.
And it has to be driven out, and you can't think for yourself, because that would be dangerous. And again, we get back to those same themes here, and the relationships between Platonism and socialism are very
Yes.
close to each other, and a lot of the socialist countries are very controlling of how
Right.
you think. That is the definition of Stalinism, is political thought control.
And that actually what we're going to see is that Plato talked about the way that you could control the masses was through their baser desires.
That's right.
When we look to the scene about the flesh fair, what we're going to see is man's baser desires, that temptation to lust and to violence, being a means by which they're controlled. And so it's a very, as I said, a Dante-esque scene. It's like the Inferno.
Very much.
But what's going to happen is it's going to show that contrast between the Orga and the Mecha, how the Orga are captive to their desires. And the reason that it's, I believe, a transhumanist fairy tale is that Spielberg's going to constantly present the bots as superior.
Absolutely.
And so if we look at this scene here, we'll see that.
What are you going to do with him?
Put him where he belongs, in show business.
It was certainly my good fortune running into you.
Gladiatorial events, dehumanization. That's what I see this as, but it's, again, the reversal. It's the humans that are dehumanized, because they're like the pagans in Rome, right, who wanted to, have these giant gladiatorial events and torture people and see them eaten by lions and so forth. But here, David and Jude Law are almost our new savior figures. They're the beginnings of a new humanity, is where this is going to take us. But in Spielberg's view, it's evolution, so it's not really humanity anymore. We're post-human. Yeah. David is going to be the founder of a new race, we're going to learn. They're aliens, but they're mechanized robotic aliens, which is a very weird turn.
Yeah, hybrids almost.
Right.
And he goes out of his way to make them look like aliens, but if you're listening and watching the movie intently, you'll notice that they're actually more advanced evolutionary form of David.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and children of all ages, what will they think of next? See here, a bitty bot, a tinker toy, a living doll. Of course, we all know why they made him. To steal your hearts, to replace your children. This is the latest iteration in a series of insults to human dignity.
And in their grand scheme to phase out all of God's little children.
Meet the next generation of child designed to do just that. Do not be fooled by the artistry of this creation. No doubt there was talent in the crafting of this simulator. Yet with the very first strike, you will see the big lie come apart before your very eyes!
Don't burn me! Don't burn me! I'm not Pinocchio! Don't make me die! I'm David! I'm David!
So there's a scene earlier in the film that really comes to fruition in the flesh fair scene, where David is set up against his brother, who's a human, who has like a wheelchair and all this elaborate apparatus because he can't get around, because he's got something wrong with him, basically. And the guy is a total butthole. He's awful, right? And so he actually torments David. David is totally cool, really nice to this rival kid, his brother, right? So we almost have this Cain and Abel kind of story that's being retold. We're getting the picture that humans are basically the pits, right? Yep. And then Monica has a little bit of humanity, but she actually forfeits that because she just lets David, like she leaves
out
him,
into the
like she just
wilderness.
abandons him out in the
Yep.
wilderness. And then he ends up in the flesh fair, and we see this total contrast between David and Jude Law. Jude Law is a sex operative, right, or a sex bot. He doesn't understand what's going on here. It doesn't make sense to him. And then we have this giant crowd of people who are motivated and manipulated by their baser desires, base emotions, and they want to torture, they want to destroy these bots who have been humanized, right? But when they finally see that it's a child, and they mistakenly think that David is a kid because he says, "Don't burn me, don't burn me," right? They get mad at Brendan Gleeson, and they throw the beanbags at him. So, what do you think about that contrast?
Well, I think that's exactly what the movie is about. And also, when his brother tortures him, the final torture is throwing him into the pool, which is where David ends up later.
Foreshadows, right?
Exactly, which is all done by the cruelty of humans.
Yes.
And so we see this water motif going through the film also, where the more that David interacts with water, the more his consciousness seems to rise, and we know that water is symbolic for consciousness in esoteric traditions.
Now, on that point, even Dr. Alan Hobby is kind of a butt. Like, he's not a great guy
no,
either.
he's not
when
at
David
all.
gets back to him,
No, I
right? Dr.
agree.
Hobby basically doesn't care what happens to David.
Does not care at all. In fact, no humans care about him at all,
Exactly.
except for his mom at the very beginning.
Right.
And even the ending where the robot people in the future bring her back for one day, and typical Spielberg trying to find a happy ending in this thing.
Right.
Even that, she's kind of odd and strange and alienated, and I know it's a very
She's a holographic recreation of a memory, and she's just as vacant as she was in real life.
Exactly, and that's what they're trying to say here. The human beings are not that great. They almost deserve to get it, and the robots are superior.
Right. So if we think, though, back to that theme of everything being programmed and mechanized, and what we've noticed in the character of David, as you said, is that he's achieved self-actualization and free association, free thought.
Right.
It's free will, basically.
Exactly.
But the rest of the people in this story, even Jude Law, they don't really seem to have this free will. They're all programmed. And that's why Dr. No is going to tell David that everything that he's looking for, he can't answer his question because it's a flat fact. And what David is trying to do is associate things through archetypes and through free will and through creativity. And the robot that he's talking to, it's a bot talking to a bot, doesn't have that ability. So this is why David is going to be the future.
That's exactly
is because
it.
he's not just a bot, he's a bot with free will and creativity.
That is exactly
And we
it.
see that in the Dr. No clip.
Yep.
But if a fairy tale is real, then wouldn't it be fact? A flat fact.
And Pinocchio awoke full of amazement.
New category, please. Combine fact with fairy tale. Now, ask him again.
How can the blue fairy make a robot into a real live boy?
Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Your quest will be perilous, yet the reward is beyond price. In his book, How Can a Robot Become Human?, Professor Alan Hobby writes of the power which will transform Mecha into Orga.
Will you tell me how to find her?
Discovery is quite possible. Our blue fairy does exist in one place and in one place only. At the end of the world where the lions weep. Here is the place dreams are born.
Many a Mecha has gone to the end of the world, never to come back. That is why they call the end of the world Manhattan.
And that's why we must go there.
post-humanity, the end of the world Manhattan.
Yep.
And we know that Manhattan has been completely destroyed. It's flooded, right? So what is fascinating about this scene on many levels is I noticed the playing with language. So Spielberg does this a lot in his films. And we mentioned earlier the Kabbalistic ideas of Hebrew vowels and making something come to life, a golem basically, right, with the imprinting protocol.
Yep.
But if you've seen Close Encounters, that whole film is actually about language and communication. So is E.T., by the way. It's all about how do we communicate across cultures, across spiritual boundaries and planes, perhaps.
Right.
But in this, it's bots communicating with bots. I like that he combines these seemingly two disparate, impossible categories of a flat fact with a fairy tale, and this basically melts down Google. It goes into shutdown mode, and it triggers this alternate program to come up that is the clue from Dr. Hobby to lead David back to self-discovery, his origins, his creator, and again, we're going to find out that this human creator is less than ideal.
Yeah, it was a test by Dr. Hobby to find out which robot would figure out its own sentience first and come back to meet its master. And again, very close to Decker in Blade Runner and various other films too. So again, this is the constant theme within the alchemical myths of creating life and having it come back to its creator. In this instance, Spielberg doesn't have it kill its creator, but it's still kind of an amazing scene.
Well, when we think about Dante's Inferno, again, after this scene is when David sinks into the water and he gets down to that abyss, and it's Coney Island, and he sees this statue of basically a Pinocchio setting, the Blue Fairy, right? And he's frozen there for millennia or aeons, basically. We don't know how long. What's weird about that is that it's very similar to, again, to Dante's Inferno, because at the pit, the very bottom of hell, it's frozen.
Frozen ice.
It's not lava, it's not a pit of fire. It's the devil basically frozen in ice, exactly. So I'm not saying that David is necessarily the devil, but he's an anti-hero in a way because he's frozen there for aeons. He's then awakened by his progeny, right, who, as we said, eventually evolved from him somehow. We don't know how, but it's AI aliens, basically. So AI, I see it, as I said, as a combining of a whole bunch of fairy tales and mythology and meshing it with something seemingly impossible to mesh with science and technology. These the flat fact and the fairy tale seem totally incommensurable. But he's meshed them together in a very fascinating, interesting way. I don't like necessarily the way the film ends, but it is basically a transhumanist fairy tale.
Well, I think it's very interesting because the next film that we're going to watch, Minority Report, which came out a year later, it has an ending very similar to the ending of AI in that Spielberg is weaving this fantasy in a kind of an attempt to have a happy ending, no matter what.
Right.
So that'll be interesting. Let's do that next.
Wally. It's okay. This is Danny Whitmore. He's from Justice. We're to give him the run of the farm.
I can't touch you.
No, don't touch him or anything else in here. Just,
You can't be in here. You'll
I
get
understand. Just answer his questions and we'll get the hell out of here.
Tell me how...
They're sleeping.
Sorry. Tell me how all this works.
The photon milk acts as both a nutrient supply and a liquid conductor. It enhances the images that each of them receive. We call the female Agatha. The twins are Arthur and Dashiell. We scan by way of optical tomography. White light pinpoints pulse along the entire length of the headgear and are reread after absorption through their brain tissue. In other words, we see what they see. They don't feel any pain. We keep their heads pretty well stocked with dopamine and endorphins. Plus, we maintain careful control over the serotonin levels. Don't want them to drift off into too deep a sleep. They can't be kept too awake either.
It's better if you don't think of them as human.
No, they're much more than that.
Science has stolen most of our miracles.
In a way, they give us hope. Hope of the existence of the divine. I find it interesting that some people have begun to deify the precogs.
Precogs are pattern recognition filters, that's all.
Yet you call this room the temple.
Just a nickname.
The oracle isn't where the power is anyway. Power's always been with the priests, even if they had to invent the oracle.
So here we have a near future dystopia where crime has been completely eliminated, we're told. And this is done through this advanced technology that also uses precogs, or people who have premonitions of the future. So I think Spielberg is once again meshing the fairy tale or the religious or the metaphysical with science and technology in this weird dystopia that's, again, from Philip K. Dick. And the reason Philip K. Dick is so important is that, as we said, he was hanging out with the Silicon Valley elite. He was writing about the internet back in Ubik, decades ago, before the internet came out. And so in all of these stories that Dick is writing, he's presaging a dark dystopian future. And in Minority Report, it's once again this blending of the religious into technocracy, right? So it's called the temple. The temple is what houses this almost Trinitarian idea here of these three precognizant individuals who are predicting where crimes are going to be, right? And so this is actually, believe it or not, what Google is up to. There are actual programs. IBM, the CEO of IBM, Jenny Romedy, has actually given lectures about cities, smart cities, installing pre-crime. And it's done through predictive algorithms, supposedly. But in my view, I mean, this is just a recipe for, the establishment to screw over whoever they want to. Right? I mean, they could just say that, oh, well, you were going to commit this crime tomorrow. We knew you were going to rob the 7-Eleven, so you're arrested, Jay. Sorry.
No, I think that's exactly what it is. And what I'm struck by Minority Report, besides some of the plot twists, is the amount of predictiveness that Spielberg has in it. Things that we are taking for granted right now, which in 2002 were unheard of, and yet they're in the film, all through the film,
right.
Including they know who you are when you walk into the grocery store or the department store. They
Right.
know what you want to buy. They know what kind of clothes you want. That's pretty shaky. I mean, and now, of course, with Google, you can say a word in your office of a product that you're interested in, and then you open up your computer, and they've already heard it, processed it, and now you're getting cookies, downloading on whatever product you were talking about, not searching for on Google, but literally talking when you think the computer's off. That's actually happened to me recently. So that's another thing about this movie that is amazing.
Yeah, the predictive programming is fascinating. In fact, I usually say that what you see in a film is probably 15 to 20 years what you're going to see in the future, right? So this was 2002, and here we are now. Targeted advertising is coming into the market. It's becoming the norm, and we're actually going to see pre-crime. There will be in the smart cities pre-crime.
I guarantee it.
So we're going to see that targeted advertising based on the total panopticism here in this next clip.
A road diverges in the desert. Lexus. The road you're on, John Anderton, is the one less traveled. Make sure you follow the
Good evening, John.
You can move the old-fashioned
John Anderton.
21 styles provides gourmet cuisine. John Anderton, you could use a Guinness right about now.
Stressed out, John Anderton.
Escape from it all, Harrison. Get away, John Anderton. Forget your troubles. Took slow, John Anderton.
That's a great scene. One of the
Yeah,
best
it
he's
is.
ever
You see
made.
the retinal scanning, and you see this. And again, I can't stress how ominous it is when I see the CEO of IBM giving public lectures about the future smart cities like Rio and Singapore. And she says basically there's going to be a giant AI central grid hub, and the entire city will be wired and linked in, an Internet of Things, and everything will be known about you. And so it's going to be so great because when you walk into the 7-Eleven, they're going to know that you like the flaming Cheetos and that you want the Nutter Butters, right? Because they know what you like, right? So it's going to be great. It's going to be phenomenal. And there won't be any crime because they're going to know ahead of. Now, that sounds like a huge scam to me. I mean, how are you going to know? And what's neat about this film is that it shows it's a scam, right? The whole precog system that's set up is run by a total crook.
And I think that's what Spielberg is trying to warn us about here, is that we'll have no civil rights when the technocrats build their world. And they don't, again, they're out of control. There's nobody watching what IBM and Google are doing.
Right.
Government agencies coming in and looking around and saying, hey, is this really what you want to be doing here? And so there's no governance. It's Wild West. And where they're headed, we don't even know. I've been told by insiders that they're 40, 50 years ahead of us at DARPA. And whatever that means, I have no idea what 50 years from us, in the future, what we're going to have. But I can imagine. And I think Spielberg is giving us a real great display of what we're going to have to deal with when we walk into department stores in the very near future.
It makes me think of the voice-to-skull technology that DARPA developed back even in the 80s and 90s, where they could actually target your skull to hear, that you need the flaming Cheetos, right? Nobody else is hearing this, and then, people are thinking you're crazy because I'm hearing voices, and what are they telling you? To buy the Cheetos.
Which is probably what most channeling is a CIA getting in somebody's head.
Like Real Genius, if you've seen that movie, that's what they do in the movie Real Genius. But so another interesting aspect of this film is drones. Nobody really knew, unless you were maybe working at the Air Force, that there was going to be this big, huge ordeal of drone warfare. And now it's commonplace. The drones, and we're going to drone attack all these, Middle Eastern countries and so forth. But nobody knew about drones really in 2002. And so we're going to see that again predicted in this clip. So just as we see in Blade Runner, right? There's the focus on eyes and eye world because it's a unique signature for who you are, your identity, right? Retinal scanning. And so in this dystopia, once again from Philip K. Dick, just like Blade Runner,
that's right.
He's concerned with eyes, and you have to get your eyes replaced in this dystopia if you want to bypass the jackbooted thugs who are coming for you.
That's right, and also Tom Cruise's character's wife uses an eye to get into the jail to free him. So yeah, the eyes are a big thing in this movie.
Crying their eyes out. You're terrified and absolutely terrified right now.
You don't want your kids to know terror. Keep them away from me.
Wait a minute, the big cat's back. What do you guys think? A drunk maybe can't wake up?
Yeah, some guy who doesn't want to get red. Folks, please be quiet. Close your doors. Go back inside. Be quiet and close the door.
We got an ID. It's not him.
Standing down. Let's see.
That scene there was, very predictive and was very scary, actually.
Well, if we think about panopticism and what it is, this is the idea that comes out of the 18th century with thinkers like Jeremy Bentham. And he wrote that you could actually construct a prison with a giant guard tower in the middle, and you keep all of the prisoner cells on the inside open. And you don't let the prisoners see when or if there are even guards in the tower. So if people are under the impression that they're always being surveilled, they self-police and they alter their behavior. And so that was discovered a long time ago, and it was called panopticism. And so this is now the term that's used by philosophers like Michel Foucault for how our system is based on NSA mass surveillance and so forth. And what it does is that even though there may not be a government agent next to you, watching you through a window or on a computer or something like that, the idea of everybody being under surveillance causes everybody to self-police themselves. And I just find it fascinating that this film is dominated by the dystopian notion of panopticism and total surveillance.
Yeah, again, this goes back to Plato's Republic and how he would control the population through these kinds of mechanisms. And I think Philip K. Dick really saw through that.
Yes.
How we were imprisoned by ideas more than anything else. So one of the big things that people have criticized this movie for is the absolutely absurd ending, where everything just suddenly begins going right for Tom Cruise. And I think that needs to be addressed because I think it's part of a sleight of hand by Spielberg, kind of an interesting sleight of hand. And that is that what I'm contending here is that everything that happens after Tom Cruise is arrested and put into that state is his fantasy inside that state.
Right.
Everything begins going right, the bad guy gets caught, embarrassed in front of his friends, his wife frees him, and the whole scene is actually so absurd, and it's not real. What I'm contending is that the last half hour of the movie is Tom Cruise's fantasy while he's been imprisoned, and the guard tells him that you're not asleep in there. He says, you're still active. Things are still going on in there. Don't for a second think that you're just going to fall into a dreamlike state. And so I think that that is what's going on here. And again, that's very Philip K. Dickian,
Yes.
in that the character suddenly takes a right turn, goes off into a completely other universe. This universe, of course, is where everything starts going right.
Yeah.
After a full hour and a half of everything going wrong.
Going wrong, yeah. And Samantha Morton ends up at this nice little cozy cottage, and she just has books that she can read and
Everything
coffee
is
to drink.
perfect.
Everything's perfect. I think you're absolutely right. And oddly enough, there's another film where Tom Cruise undergoes that exact same thing called Vanilla Sky.
Great film.
Where we discover that he's actually been in cryogenesis for his entire, we don't know how long. It's centuries into the future. There is a juxtaposition between everything going bad and when he's put into that stasis or cryogenics or whatever it is, it's all some sort of mental phantasm.
Right. And I think people will understand the movie a lot better once you understand that.
So in my view, Minority Report is Philip K. Dick, again, talking to people from Silicon Valley back in the day, 60s, 70s, right? And knowing where they were going to take things, maybe even 50 years ahead of time, because what we see in this film, even though it's, 15, 17 years ago, Philip K. Dick was telling us stuff that is still yet to come. I mean, the smart cities have not even been put into place yet. So I see this as yet another warning of the dangers of technology. I mean, they can be a great thing, but they can also really imprison us, not so much through some actual government agent, but as we said, the power of the ideas behind mass surveillance and panopticism.
Yeah, I do believe that this is both a warning from Spielberg and Dick about where we're headed, and we better think about what's going on here real fast, because this world is coming at us like a freight train, and again, there's nobody watching the gate.
Join us again next time for Hollywood Decoded. I'm Jay Dyer.
And I'm Jay Widener. Thanks for watching.